The late afternoon sun gilded the dusty streets of Montgomery, Alabama, as Marcus adjusted his faded cap over his pinned-up dreadlocks and wiped his hands on his grimy jeans. It had been a long day at the garage, and all he wanted to do was sit on the porch with his mother and listen to the blues on the portable radio. But fate had other plans that day. As he rounded the corner onto Pinewood Avenue, a trail of smoke drew attention ahead. A white Cadillac with a blown tire was parked on the shoulder. A blonde woman, visibly distressed, was nervously trying to open the trunk, tripping over her own heels. Marcus slowed the old truck, pulled over, and got out without saying a word. The woman turned around in alarm, but before she could protest, he was on his knees assessing the situation. "Do you have the spare tire?" he asked calmly. I think so," she replied, still suspicious. He didn't comment on the obvious contrast between the two, a black man covered in grease and a white woman in designer clothes. He just did what he was saying. The silence that hung over him was broken only by the metallic clicks of the tire, being quickly changed by hands accustomed to the weight of responsibility. Sarah watched, confused. She had never imagined that someone would stop to help without wanting something in return, especially here, in that neighborhood, at that time. When she tried to thank him with a $50 bill, Marcus raised an eyebrow, smiled, and said, "Save it for when you really need it. Just remember that kindness costs nothing, but it's worth a lot." She stood there holding the money, not knowing what to do, while he waved and disappeared into the intersection. That night, Marcus went home like any other day. He sat on the porch, opened a cheap beer, and laughed at his mother's stories, never imagining that the simple gesture of that afternoon was about to change everything. The wheel he had firmly tightened was not the only one that was starting to turn in that city, full of invisible walls and silent codes. The next morning, as the neighborhood slowly woke up, a different sound cut through the air. A deep, luxurious engine rumble. A black SUV, sleek as a mirror, pulled up in front of Marcus's house. 3 figures got out. The first was a white man in a light-colored suit with gray hair and a steady gaze. The second was a black woman with an elegant posture and a questioning look in her eyes. And finally Sarah, now dressed more simply but with the same expression of someone carrying something important. Marcus appeared at the door with a cup of coffee in his hand and a puzzled expression. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," the gray-haired man said. "Can we talk for a minute?" Time seemed to slow down. Neighbors began to peer out their windows. What was that car doing there? Who were those people? And most importantly, why were they looking for Marcus? What had seemed like a simple thank you was about to throw open old doors, reopen hidden wounds, and launch Marcus on a journey that would challenge not only his faith, but everything he believed about justice, identity, and purpose. Marcus took a step back, wary. It wasn't every day that a well-dressed white man, a stylish black woman, and a young white woman showed up at your door, especially in an SUV that cost more than the entire block. Sarah smiled, visibly relieved that he was there. "Marcus, I needed to see you. This is my Aunt Lillian and this is my Uncle Charles. They're my legal guardians." The woman, Lillian, nodded slightly, taking in every detail around them, from the peeling paint on the porch to the cracked cup in Marcus's hands. Charles extended his hand formally. "Sarah told us what you did. Frankly, in a world where everyone walks right by, your gesture was—" He paused as if searching for a less grandiose word. "Remarkable." Marcus shook her hand firmly but kept his gaze intent. "And what does that have to do with 3 people from the rich part of town showing up here unannounced?" Charles smiled, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "We like to reward good deeds. We think of something that can really make a difference to you." "Reward?" Marcus frowned, looking from Sarah to Lillian. "What do you think this was? A trade?" Lillian, who had remained silent until then, spoke softly but firmly. "It's not about buying your kindness, Marcus. It's about recognizing that attitudes like yours should be the foundation of any society. But since they aren't, we want to make a symbol of it." The conversation moved inside the house. Marcus hesitated, but made room for them to enter. They sat on makeshift chairs with Marcus's mother, Mrs. Evelyn, peering in from the kitchen. Charles was blunt. We want to offer you a $10,000 fund. You decide what to do with it. You can start a business, invest in your house, pay for your education, whatever you want. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes half closed. This sounded like a polite trap. And what do you want in return? Sarah intervened. Nothing, just that you think about it carefully. You could change lives here, like you changed mine yesterday. Lillian stood up and took an envelope with the Family Foundation seal from her purse. These are the terms. No strings attached. You sign only if you want to. She placed the envelope on the scratched wooden table and looked Marcus straight in the eye. But make no mistake. Accepting this is more than just taking money. It's accepting that your choice will resonate. It will be seen, commented on, criticized, applauded. Marcus didn't respond. The silence hung heavy in the air for a few seconds until Mrs. Evelyn appeared with a plate of cornbread and 2 glasses of sweet tea. While you're thinking, eat something. Conversation is better on a full stomach. The gesture broke the tension for a moment. Charles thanked him with a slight smile. Sarah seemed more at ease, and Marcus kept his eyes on the envelope like someone facing a crossroads. He knew that nothing in life comes for free, but he also knew that certain paths, no matter how difficult, could be exactly what the entire neighborhood was waiting for. Chapter 3. Voices from the neighborhood. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. The envelope lay on the kitchen table, like a wild animal he feared waking. Every step he took through the house brought him back to it. $10,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. But with that money came something else. Responsibility. And in the 1970s in Montgomery, a black man receiving a helping hand from a powerful white family didn't go unnoticed. At 7 in the morning, he was sitting in the neighborhood diner, the envelope still sealed under his arm. The cafe smelled of fried bacon and suspicion. Bobby, his childhood friend and former member of the Black Panthers, approached the table and tapped Marcus on the shoulder. I heard the elite sent a tank to your door yesterday. Is that true? Marcus gave a half smile. They did, and they left this here. He pushed the envelope toward him. Bobby didn't open it. He just stared. You know what this represents, right? This money comes with a trail, brother. It may seem like a gift, but it's like an invisible leash. They're going to want to shape your story. Marcus stared at his friend for a long moment. What if this time the story is mine? What if I can use this to open the garage I've always dreamed of? Employ the kids here, teach them a trade. I'm not talking about selling my soul. I'm talking about building something that will last. Bobby leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. You've always been more patient than me. Maybe that's why you have a better chance of changing something. At that moment, 2 black women walked by the table, overheard part of the conversation, and approached. One of them, named Miss Clarice, spoke in a low voice. Marcus, you are one of us. If this money can do good for the community, perhaps God has used them as an instrument. Just be careful not to let them use you in the process. Back home, Marcus found Mrs. Evelyn sitting at her sewing machine, sewing an old dress for a neighbor. Mom, what would you do in my place? She didn't even look at him. She just answered firmly, I would do what my heart tells me, but only after asking God if my heart isn't being deceived. He knew what she meant. Not every gift is a blessing. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's fire disguised as gold. That night, he returned to the porch with the envelope still sealed, now accompanied by a blank sheet of paper. He picked up a pen and began to write. Not about himself, but about what he would do with the money if he accepted it. He wrote names, ideas, possibilities. When he finished, he took a deep breath, folded the paper, and put it in his pocket. The sure envelope was still there, intact, but something inside it had already changed. The decision was made 2 days later. Marcus showed up at the Foundation's headquarters, located in the city's commercial center, a mirrored building that stood out from everything he knew. He was wearing his best shirt, still worn, and shoes polished with motor oil. Sarah, was waiting for him in the hall, anxious, holding the same nervous smile she had when she first saw him on the road. "You came," she said, surprised. "I did, but I didn't come to seek favors. I came to build the future," he replied. They were led to a modern room where Charles and Lillian were already waiting for them. Charles stood up with practiced formality and held out a contract. "Did you read it carefully?" Marcus took the paper he had written, the plan, from his pocket. "Before you sign anything, you're going to hear what I want to do with this money." Lillian crossed her legs in interest. Charles just gestured for him to continue. "I want to open a community garage near the local public school. But it's not just for fixing cars. It's going to teach mechanics to kids who have nowhere to go after they finish high school. I want 3 permanent jobs for ex-convicts who are reintegrating, and a mobile garage that will serve widows and single mothers free of charge." The silence lasted exactly 8 seconds. Charles cleared his throat. "It's ambitious," Lillian, however, smiled. "It's transformative." Sarah looked excited. "That's exactly what I was hoping for when I convinced you to come here." Charles looked at her, then at Marcus. "We accept, but we'll document everything to maintain transparency." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Transparency? Great. Start by telling us where the money came from." Lillian laughed. "Good deeds generate good reserves. That's one of them. And trust me, Marcus, this project will resonate much further than you can imagine." Hours later, the deposit was made. Marcus left the building with his heart racing and his ideas bubbling. He couldn't waste any time. The following days were a whirlwind. Meetings with community leaders, searches for abandoned warehouses, conversations with teachers, invitations to disinterested young people who spent their days on the street corner. The garage was beginning to take shape, even though it was still just a drawing board. But like every good idea that blossoms in uneven soil, thorns began to grow too. One of the first to oppose it was Willie, the owner of the only garage in the area, a bitter and arrogant man who had monopolized repairs with abusive prices for years. "This neighborhood doesn't need charity, it needs respect for the rules," he said in front of everyone during a church meeting. "And who is this Marcus to come in now playing the savior?" Marcus looked at the man calmly. "I'm not anyone's savior. I'm just giving these people what they never gave us, an opportunity." But his words, even though they were firm, didn't silence the whispers. Some residents were suspicious. Others thought he had made some kind of shady deal with the rich whites. And then came the lowest blow. An anonymous flyer began to circulate around the neighborhood, claiming that Marcus was a puppet of the elite, a domesticated Negro being used for propaganda. Sarah saw one of the flyers and took it, straight to him. "You know that's a lie, right?" Marcus looked at it, took a deep breath, and said, "I know. But sometimes the truth takes a little longer to prove itself." She touched his hand. "Then let me help you. Let me show them who you really are." And in that moment, between fear and courage, something changed between them. Word of the community garage spread like wildfire. Within a week, Marcus had a piece of land from a local pastor, support from a small group of progressive businessmen in the city, and even the promise of equipment donated by a former Detroit tool factory. But along with the hope came pressure. Sheriff McCullough, a hard-faced white man with a blemished record, showed up at the construction site citing zoning irregularities. "Do you have a license for this, Marcus?" he asked, not hiding his intimidating tone. "I'm within the law, Sheriff, and if you don't, I'm coming in." The officer spat on the ground and said before leaving, "It's been a long time since we've seen a black man with this much ambition around. Here, you better know where you're stepping." 2 days later, the warehouse woke up with racist graffiti and broken windows. It was a clear response from someone who was uncomfortable with change. Marcus gathered the young volunteers and, without raising his voice, said, "We're not going to stop. This is bigger than a dirty wall. It's about giving choices to people who've never had any." Sarah arrived shortly after, carrying buckets of paint and sandwiches. She painted along with the boys, even with her nails done and a light-colored dress, showing that she wasn't Just another nice rich girl she was willing to get dirty for this cause. As they painted, a boy named Theo, just 15 years old, approached Marcus. "Mr. Marcus, my father used to say that black people only survive in silence, but you make me want to speak up." Marcus held back his emotions, just squeezed the boy's shoulder and said, "Then speak up, Theo. Speak up." As the project took shape, Charles began to show discomfort with the way things were going. In a private meeting with Lillian, he grumbled, this was supposed to be a symbolic gesture, not a social movement. Lillian, however, seemed increasingly enchanted by Marcus's impact. "Maybe that's what we've always lacked, Charles. People with courage. Maybe we've been the instruments without knowing it." Charles sighed. "I hope you're right, because if he falls, he won't fall alone. Our family is already too involved in this." Sarah overheard part of the hallway conversation, and what she heard only increased her desire to protect Marcus, not just as an ally, but as someone she deeply admired. The feeling grew in silence, almost forbidden by the time and circumstances. That night, Marcus and Bobby sat on the roof of Donna Evelyn's house, watching the lights of the garage under construction in the distance. "You're becoming a legend, brother," Bobby said. "And you know what they do to black legends in this country, right?" Marcus looked up at the sky, then at the city. "If I have to fall, let's do it building something that lifts others up. I'm tired of being just a survivor. I want to be a seed." Bobby smiled. "Then let's make sure no one steps on you before you bloom." And there, between promises and veiled threats, Marcus was taking firm steps even on shaky ground. What had begun as a gesture of kindness was now becoming a quiet revolution, and everyone, including him, knew that the price would be high. Over the next week, Marcus found himself at the center of a storm. The defamatory article had triggered a ripple effect. Reporters showed up at the garage door every day, some genuinely curious, others looking for scandal. Sarah had been removed from Montgomery's high society social events and was treated like a traitor at dinners, church services, and even by her own family. Lillian tried to contain the damage with rehearsed speeches, while Charles maintained the rigid stance of someone who blamed the chaos on the gesture he had once praised. Marcus, on the other hand, doubled down. He launched the first official class of students, organized a community renovation project on neighborhood homes, and began a campaign to provide daily meals for students. But each step forward was met with retaliation. Parts were missing, the power was cut without warning, and licenses were reevaluated. That Thursday, tensions flared. Theo, the young apprentice, was stopped by the police as he was leaving the workshop with a toolbox. He was accused of theft, arrested, assaulted. Marcus went to the police station, furious, demanding explanations. Sheriff McCullough smiled as if he had expected it. "Your project is creating delinquents, Marcus. It's teaching them to take, not to ask." Marcus almost lost control, but held on tight. Theo left the cell with his face swollen and eyes downcast. "They said that if I went back to the garage, I would disappear like my cousin." Marcus took the boy home and spent the night on the porch with Mrs. Evelyn. "They're squeezing me, Mom, from all sides. And I don't know if I can stand to see these boys paying the price for my name." Evelyn took his hand. "You're not responsible for the evil of others, only for your courage to face it. And courage, my son, is not the absence of fear, it's decision." Meanwhile, Sarah was butting heads with Charles in one of the toughest conversations they'd ever had. "Don't you see? This project is more real than anything we've ever done with that foundation. You want me to walk away from it because you're worried about what people will say, but I care about what's left when they stop talking." Charles took a deep breath. "You're in love with him, aren't you?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Maybe I am, but even if I weren't, I'd still choose his side. Because for the first time, I feel like I'm living with purpose." Charles lowered his head, defeated, and left without saying anything else. At the workshop, Marcus received a subpoena. The land was the target of a lawsuit. They alleged that he had unduly benefited from private and public funds without proper bidding. It was clear that the siege was political. Bobby appeared at the same time. "The city will try to silence you with the stroke of a pen, but we are no longer alone. He handed over a list. More than 100 residents had signed a petition in support of the project. They can try to destroy it with laws, with threats, with force, but the people have seen light where before there was only abandonment, and that, Marcus, they cannot erase. That night, Marcus slept little. The garage was standing, the boys were safe, for now. But the battle ahead was bigger than any before. It wasn't about building a shop anymore. It was about upholding an ideal. And to do that, he knew he would have to see it through, even if it cost him everything. Marcus arrived at the garage early that Friday. The smell of grease still hung in the air, but the place was too quiet. Theo and 2 other apprentices hadn't shown up. A neighbor brought the news. Theo's mother had sent him away to live with an uncle in Atlanta. She said she wanted to save the boy before he was sacrificed for someone else's idea. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just resistance anymore. It was fear spreading like poison. The shop felt emptier than ever, even with the tools in place and the shed intact. Bobby walked in a moment later, his face tense. The DA's office filed charges. They want you out in 30 days. Marcus didn't answer. He just walked over to the board where he hung the course plans, schedules, and goals. He took them all down and wrote in large letters, "We don't back down." Sarah showed up late in the afternoon. She was exhausted, her hair down, her hands shaking. "Marcus, the foundation froze the rest of the funds, and Charles is trying to officially end any connection with you." Marcus just nodded. "I expected that." She looked at him then, her eyes brimming with tears. "And my family is threatening me. They said that if I don't cut any ties with you, they'll strip me of my inheritance, the company, and even force me to leave town." Marcus stepped closer. "I never wanted you to lose anything because of me." She interrupted him. "But I gained purpose, courage, and no one can take that away. If I have to choose between comfort and truth, I'll take the truth." They held each other not for romance, but for survival, for trust, for everything the world wanted to extinguish, but they kept burning. The next morning, a surprise. Miss Clarice, the elderly woman who helped in the church kitchen, appeared in the workshop with a box of papers. "Here are the names of men and women who want to volunteer. Plumbers, retired teachers, drivers, even a black ex-cop who wants to teach defensive driving. This is bigger than you, Marcus. Bigger than all of us." Marcus felt the weight and blessing of those words. That same day, with the help of Sarah and Bobby, they recorded a simple video. They showed the warehouse, the students, the classes, the impacts. They posted it on social media and sent it to independent newspapers. Within 48 hours, it went viral. Media outlets from outside began covering the story. People from other cities sent letters, donations, support. But with the light came the denser shadows. One night before the trial of the land, shots were fired at the facade of the workshop. No one was hurt, but the holes in the walls were more than physical marks. They were warnings. The sheriff showed up at the scene the next day, this time with a cynical smile. "Maybe it's time for you to accept that this is too dangerous, Marcus. People like you attract trouble." Marcus replied firmly, "No, Sheriff, people like me attract truth, and the truth bothers those who live by lies." He turned his back and went back to work. At the end of the day, Sarah brought an envelope with the court's preliminary ruling. The judge would schedule a public hearing to deliberate whether the garage represented a social risk or a community advance. The fate of the project, and Marcus's reputation, would be decided in front of the entire town. And so, with his heart on fire and his feet planted like roots, Marcus prepared for what could be his downfall, or his rebirth. The fight was about to reach the point of no return, and the entire past, present, and future of that neighborhood depended on a single moment: the judgment of the seed he had dared to plant. The Montgomery Municipal Courthouse was packed. People were leaning against the walls, sitting on the steps, some holding signs in support of the garage, others with hard eyes and arms crossed, waiting for Marcus to fall like people watching a spectacle. The cameras of 2 independent broadcasters were positioned discreetly. On the left side of the room, Marcus sat with Bobby and Sarah beside him. On the other side sat representatives of the local business community, led by Walter Davis, the political aide who was now leading the effort to shut down the project. The judge, a middle-aged white man named Harold Branson, entered without ceremony and called for silence. Today, we will decide whether Marcus Lee's community garage represents a social benefit or a public safety hazard. Marcus was the first to be called. His speech was unrehearsed. He simply stood up, looked around the room, and spoke as if speaking to his own soul. I didn't come here to beg to keep my dream alive. I came to show that this dream is no longer mine. It belongs to every child who walked barefoot in that workshop, to every mother who sleeps peacefully because her child is learning something other than fear, to every elderly person who donated tools believing that, perhaps this time, hope would not be uprooted. They called me manipulated, a symbol, a danger. But what threatens this city is not the garage. It is the idea that we, the forgotten, now have a voice. The hall remained silent for a moment that seemed to suspend time. Then Walter was called. With a cold tone, he tried to link Marcus to social instability, citing police incidents, proximity to activists, and risks to the integrity of young people without adequate supervision. But the more he spoke, the more the audience seemed to disconnect from him. The climax came when Sarah asked to speak. The judge hesitated, but allowed it. She stood up, elegant, but with burning eyes. I am the daughter of this city's elite. I grew up surrounded by luxury, but empty of truth. When I met Marcus, I understood that charity is not about giving away coins, it's about giving away courage. And if this city is going to save itself, it's going to need people like him, more than families like mine. Lillian was also present, sitting in the third row, and at the end of her speech she stood up spontaneously. My name is Lillian Carter. For decades I have participated in social decisions that pretended to help, but only perpetuated control. Marcus has shown me that true help is about giving up control, and I publicly acknowledge, this is not a project of our foundation. This is the birth of something our foundation has never been able to do. The judge called for order as the murmurs grew. He called a 10-minute recess. The tension was as heavy as concrete. In the aisles, Bobby approached Marcus. Whatever the decision, brother, you have already won, because this city will never look at you the same way again. When the judge returned, the room held its breath. Branson read the opinion calmly. After analyzing the social impact, testimonies, and documentary evidence, this court recognizes the Marcus Lee Garage as a project of significant community interest. The action against its operation is therefore dismissed. The hall erupted in applause. Screams, tears, hugs. Marcus remained still, silent, as if absorbing a miracle in slow motion. Sarah hugged him tightly, and even the judge had to bang his gavel several times to contain his excitement. Outside, a crowd was waiting, and upon receiving the news began to sing, smile, celebrate. It wasn't just about a garage. It was about each door that could now be opened by hands that had, previously, only knocked in silence. That night the garage stayed lit until late. Mrs. Evelyn made cornbread, Bobby organized an impromptu blues circle, and Sarah danced for the first time in years. But even in the middle of the party, Marcus knew there was still more to do. Because winning in court was only the beginning. The real work began the next day, building, teaching, resisting. 2 months after the court ruling, Marcus Lee's auto shop was no longer just a project. It was an institution. The entire neighborhood had grown up around the idea. Young people who had once roamed the streets were now competing for spots in mechanics classes. Volunteer residents took turns teaching, providing services, and even preparing the meals that were served daily. And most importantly, there was dignity in the eyes of those who entered through that worn metal gate. Marcus walked through the workshop like a farmer in the middle of the harvest. His hands were more calloused, his eyes more attentive, but there was a new glow in his face, that of someone who knew he had planted something that no one else could uproot. Sarah, in turn, had left behind the surname that had previously opened doors for her, and now walked hand in hand with her conviction. Working as the workshop coordinator, she was respected by everyone, not for her past, but for the present she had built with her own hands. Between her and Marcus What existed no longer needed to be labeled. It was more than love, it was an alliance. A bond formed not by movie romance but by mutual dedication and the courage to dream together in hostile soil. Bobby, on the other hand, had become an official safety and maintenance instructor. Men who had once feared him for his past now sought him out for advice about their children, about life, about the future. But not everything was calm. One morning, Marcus received the news that Walter Davis had been nominated as the official candidate for mayor. His campaign used a subtly disguised discourse: order, tradition, security. Words that, in that context, pointed directly to projects like Marcus's. It was a reminder that the enemy never disappears. It just changes its clothes. Instead of backing down, Marcus proposed a new plan: to replicate the garage in other neighborhoods of the city, to create a network of community workshops. The proposal was received with enthusiasm by some and with threats by others. But Marcus was no longer seeking approval. He sought continuity. In the last public scene of the year, the workshop held a festival with presentations by the apprentices, exhibitions of the projects, and even a talent fair. Theo, now 16, presented an engine that he had dismantled and rebuilt himself. Beside him, his mother wept softly, moved. Miss Clarice received an award for her dedication to the project. Lillian sat quietly in the back and applauded when Marcus stepped onto the small makeshift stage. He didn't use a microphone. He just raised his voice and said, "What started with a flat tire has become a road. And now, this road belongs to all of us. Keep going. Even when it's hard. Keep going. Because changing the world doesn't start with a million voices. It starts with just one saying, 'I no longer accept silence.'" That night, after everyone had left, Marcus sat on the porch of his house next to Donna Evelyn, as he had done before it all began. "You've gone far, my son," she said, her eyes tired and her heart full. "I only went as far as the truth told me to go," he replied. And he stayed there, in silence, listening to the crickets, the wind, and the distant sound of the city. Now, more alive, more aware, more prepared. Because true faith doesn't need a pulpit. It reveals itself in attitudes and difficult choices, in the love that is planted, even knowing that it may never see the harvest. And Marcus planted, against all statistics, against all fears, and the world, no matter how small that piece of it was, would never be the same again.